This video is an addition to my 2019 Capture Mission Racing tier list, DriftFrame. If you haven't seen that, go watch it, it's linked below. Behold! At the time of this recording, Wisp is our newest addition to the Warframe roster, and she's pretty spicy for racing, with several relevant speed abilities, such as Haste Mode, and the Will-O-Wisp teleport, which is more a repositioning thing because she can move faster than it, even if you hold it down. But she also has high base sprint speed, which is always an asset. That's 1.2 sprint speed. And Wisp also has unusually strong survivability without modding for any, so you get that from the Vitality mode, that max health, that health per second, and also from Wisp's Invisible While Airborne passive. When racing, you will be airborne a lot as you're parkouring and jumping over things and just letting your momentum carry you across stuff. You're airborne more often than you would think, which leads to a lot of invisibility and makes Wisp very tanky, which is relevant in racing. I would probably use Proton Pulse in the final slot if I had space. It doesn't have any synergy with Wisp, I just think it's a good mod for racing. It's good for turning corners because it lets you get back to going fast after losing some of your momentum. Basically, you kick off the wall after you slow down and take a turn. There's generally a wall there since you have to turn around it. I would say the essentials for Wisp's build are narrow-minded and a lot of strength. I wouldn't worry about efficiency at all, since Wisp has a sizable gas tank of 300 energy, and as always, I would say that you should mix sprint speed and friction reduction mods like Cunning Drift to taste. It's how much you're going to use them that makes them effective, and if the slide is too much for you, obviously it's not useful. I'm putting Wisp in B tier, but we're going to talk about more later. I think that Wisp is a lot less clear than a lot of other frames. Her speed puts her in B tier, but how she gets that speed is complicated, and I think it's worth mentioning. So anyway, we'll get back to that, but I would say B tier. Wisp is pretty fast. Wisp's most straightforward speed ability is Haste Mode, which gives 20% movement speed at base, modified by strength. This is more than a lot of C tier frames, such as Korra, who have 15% speed buffs at base, and less than most A tier frames, which have buffs as strong as 50% at base. So again, a 20% base movement speed buff, that's pretty good. And Wisp also has a very rare quality in some capture target tech that we'll discuss later. And of course I'm talking about her teleport, but just like Neja's Blazing Chakram, Wisp's teleport doesn't move faster than Wisp can at her top speed. As you can see, I can just barely outrun the clone if I go as fast as I can. So sometimes it will make you speed up, but in general, unleashing the clone even while holding the button down is not actually a way to go faster in general. If you're already going fast, it's not going to speed you up. However, it still does have a few very nice qualities. You might have noticed that it allowed me to maintain momentum. That's very important, and a lot of teleports don't do that. And Will-O-Wisp is still crucial to Wisp's success, as we'll come back to in a minute. And although the faster version you get by holding down the ability isn't usually faster than your top speed on the ground, it is pretty fast, and is frequently faster when traveling across difficult terrain, as long as it doesn't get caught on something. You can also use it as a sort of insurance. If you're going through a tight area or you think you might not make it, just fire it off, and if it gets through the area but you don't, you can just swap with it and correct your mistake. So as for Wisp on the tier list, Wisp is a little tricky to place because almost all of her advantage requires very specific play, and I'll explain what I mean by that. With Volt as an example, if you just hit his speed ability throughout the race without paying any attention to any of your opponents, you will generally go fast, and you won't often buff your opponents due to low range. If you actively try to avoid buffing them, you'll obviously do better, but Volt's speed is far from useless even if you don't play around its weakness, because it is overall difficult for your opponents to get the buff. With Wisp, on the other hand, you are basically guaranteed to lose all of your advantages and give the buff to your opponents if you just hit your speed abilities without any specific tactics. So I am putting Wisp in B tier because I think that's where she ends up if you play her optimally, and I think it's doable to do what she asks of you. In other words, playing her optimally is realistic. But this is a case where she can easily be as low as D tier if you just use her abilities in straightforward ways. Let's get into why that is. Here we are at the beginning of a race, and I'm going to put this pad down to signal the start of the race. I want to get ready and buff my speed by deploying my Haste Mode reservoir. But if I put down the reservoir now, my opponents will just take the buff too. If I go over here, it's just sitting here. The radius in which you can claim the buff is very small, as you can see, but I mean it's right there, you can just walk over it. I can jump into the air and hope that they don't notice, place the well in the air like that, but again, it shows up on the minimap and it's easy enough for them to just jump up there. I could run bullet jump mods so that I can get even higher, but as you'll see, if I try to jump as high as I can, you can actually pretty easily just hit the skybox of the tile. Anyway, you'll have to take my word for it. I tested this on a few different tracks in the starting area, and there was consistently not enough extra room above you to stash a reservoir with higher bullet jump velocity before I just hit the invisible ceiling. So in other words, you can jump higher than your opponents, that's all well and good, but you can't put a reservoir up there because the tile says you're out of bounds and puts you back down here. You can, however, solve this problem with Will-O-Wisp. There are two solutions. The first one is when the pad is counting down, so we'll put down a pad again, you can just stay here, and when it's time for everyone to go, you just send your clone out and stay here, and then buff yourself. And once you're ready, do all of them, why not? And then once you're ready, you just hit the clone button, and boop, you're over here. Now, obviously, it wasn't time to go yet, but you get the idea. You get a lot of the ground that you sacrifice back by using your clone. Your clone is at all the time in the world to drift up the track, and then you just hit the teleport button and catch back up. That works just fine, and if your opponents stay behind to take your buffs, you do lose your speed advantage against that opponent, those people that stayed behind, but you do get a huge lead against them because you teleport. The biggest problem with that solution is that other frames with teleports can hard counter Wisp by just copying her behavior, gaining her speed buff while losing little to no distance in the race by using their own teleport. In this way, Loki in particular is disastrous for Wisp, with his excellent base sprint speed superior to hers, loads of modding space to boost that speed even more since he doesn't need strength, and his switch teleport used on his decoy or another opponent. It's possible that Loki will throw two people under the bus. Loki stays behind and steals your buff, and then he teleports back ahead just like you do, but with your buff, and swaps with another opponent, who then not only falls behind, but also gets given your own speed buff, so you lose it against even another opponent. So not only are you behind the Loki player, you're also probably going to be behind the person they swapped with because they got your speed buff. So not a good time for Wisp. But still, most of the time that solution will work fine. If you absolutely need to not use that solution, I've noticed that Will-O-Wisp behaves very strangely with the boundary area of the... Anyway, look. So I'm going to send the clone up. We're going to let it go for a while. So that's plenty higher than you should be able to be. And you see it got deleted up there. So we'll let it go way up there. And then boop. And now up here, yeah, you can't jump that high. Like, no one can jump that high. You can't. You can just barely get there with a double jump. But, like, normal jumping is not going to get you up there. Now, if you could use your operator, you can see we can go up. And that's the ceiling, right? But ultimately, you can't get that high. So that's a solution as well. Like, overall, if people aren't running bullet jump mods, they shouldn't be able to get up there. But it's not perfect. It's a little messy. And again, it does depend on the tile. I can't tell if Will-O-Wisp is giving you some leeway with the ceiling, or maybe this tile is just taller. Again, I tested plenty and there wasn't much room up there. So go figure, that's another potential option. Now, where Wisp is unique as a DriftFrame racing frame is when capturing the target. So if you cap the target like this, it's invisible there. You can send out your clone, start capping, and then still teleport while continuing the animation so that you can cap over here. There are a couple of ways to use this to your benefit. While you're capping, generally the other opponents will try to guess which way extraction is going to be and get a head start. And that's usually a balancing mechanic that the person who gets the capture point gets a bit behind on extraction, as long as people play well and guess which way extraction is going to be. But if you're the Wisp player and you get the cap, you can send your clone the way that you think extraction is going to be, and if you guess right, then you get just as much of a head start as everyone else, and it makes no difference. So you end up kind of gaining bonus distance, or potential bonus distance, by being the person who gets the cap, which is valuable. That's definitely a large advantage. Again, sometimes you will even be able to benefit from repositioning while capping, like you saw me do, where you can sort of do it in the middle of the animation. You send the clone out, start capping, and then you can just move while capping. This is not useful as often, but it does allow you to avoid the line of fire. And again, potentially if the clone is going to run out, you can just jump ahead of time. I think it's often going to be better on distance to fire the clone in a direction you guess extraction is going to be, and then start capping and probably teleport after you're done capping. But a lot of the time, the clone's just not going to last that long. Like, we have a lot of duration on this setup, and the clone just doesn't last that long, especially if you charge it. I would recommend doing it without charging it if you're going to go this route. So we'll look at the clone with this build. and you can see that it has not the highest duration. It's only going to last 9 seconds-ish, so you don't have forever to just leave it out there. The cap takes a little while, so, you have to be careful with that. But anyway, it's a thing you can do, and that's a pretty big advantage. There are very few other frames that have this flexibility in the middle of a race. It's a pretty big deal. And if you don't get the capture target, you can send out Will-O-Wisp to guess a second potential direction that extraction might be. That means that Wisp can be guessing aggressively which way extraction will be, and then you have insurance because you can teleport back. Oftentimes there are a few obvious ways it might be, and if you guess one, you might get blown out. But if you can guess two, you're very, very unlikely to get unlucky and have neither of them be the right way. So this is pretty powerful. Again, it's definitely something unique. There is still that concern of refreshing your moat buffs toward the end of the race, but they do last a while. As you can see here, I have 66 seconds of duration, and in that last situation, although I dawdled a little bit at the capture target, it was still most of the race. So often you won't need to rebuff if you're going really fast and on a shorter track, but if you do need to rebuff, you can simply use Will-O-Wisp for that too. Have Will-O-Wisp keep racing, just fire it in the direction you're going, and as we've shown, it's almost as fast as you are on the ground, so then you can just go on some detour and buff in a corner where nobody will notice, and then get back on track by teleporting to your clone. And if allies want to steal your buffs, your opponents will need to take this huge detour where they know where they are because they see the huge symbol on the minimap, but they have to go way off track to get the buffs, which generally won't be worth it. So that's Wisp, a really interesting addition to DriftFrame and a somewhat challenging frame to race with. I'm looking forward to seeing your creative uses of Will-O-Wisp and your sneaky reservoir pit stops out there on the racetrack. As with all DriftFrame videos, I've left the time of our next scheduled racing stream down below, and I hope to catch you there.